Good evening.
Unai Emery has just made his return to the Premier League, and the Spanish manager will be looking to silence his doubters after his previous stint in the Premier League. Emery was previously the manager at Arsenal, but only stayed at the helm for 18 months before being replaced by Mikel Arteta. In his first season at the club, Arsenal were dead certain to finish in the Champions League spots with just 5 games to go in the season. But then, in typical Arsenal fashion, Arsenal capitulated and ended up with just 4 points from the 5 games, and ended up in 5th place. They also lost the Europa League final to Chelsea in Baku, and ended up out of the Champions League altogether once more. The defeat left a bitter taste in the end, despite an otherwise improved season for Arsenal. Emery was sacked at the start of the next season in November after a 7-game winless run for Arsenal. In July 2020, Emery was appointed as Villarreal manager in a bid to redeem himself back in his home country. Hi guys, and welcome to Football Talk, where we're dedicated towards bringing you the latest news from all over Europe's top leagues. Today we're going to be looking at Aston Villa's appointment of Unai Emery as the successor of Liverpool legend Steven Gerrard, after an indifferent start to the season for Villa. Before we get into the video, today's random fact for our viewers is focusing on the man himself. Unai Emery won 3 consecutive Europa League titles with Sevilla before winning his record 4th Europa League title with Villarreal in 2021. He is the most decorated manager in the Europa League of all time. Today, we'll be looking at 2 things. The state of Aston Villa right now, which led to the sacking of a Premier League legend in Steven Gerrard. And second, why Unai Emery is the perfect match for Aston Villa and could potentially lead them to the European spots very soon. So, on to the first part. Why was Gerrard sacked? Simply put, the step up from the Scottish League was too big for him. His signing of former Liverpool player teammate Philippe Coutinho was also very underwhelming, as the Brazilian failed to produce the goods on a consistent basis. Their form, at best, was inconsistent, and at worst was relegation worthy. The start of this season especially was abysmal, with 6 losses, 3 draws and just 2 wins from Aston Villa's first 11 games, with enough for Gerrard to get the sack. For a Villa team that had ambitions to break into the European spots, languishing just above the relegation zone after 11 games was a worrying sign, and the administration at the club was looking to quickly recover from this setback. Signing Unai Emery, however, is a serious sign of intent, given the pedigree that Unai Emery possesses. Let there be no mistake, a 5th place finish and a Europa League final is no small feat for Arsenal, especially when Arsene Wenger had resigned just a season prior to Emery's arrival. Despite an improved finish, the underwhelming finish and the indifferent start to his 2nd season at Arsenal led to his dismissal. But with Villarreal, Emery went a long way towards redeeming his reputation. In his first season in charge in 2020, he broke the club record of the longest unbeaten streak by going 19 games without a single loss before we had even reached January. That year, he also beat his former club Arsenal in the semi-finals of the Europa League with Villarreal, a club much smaller than Arsenal, with a smaller budget as well, before he went on to beat Manchester United in the Europa League final. Despite coming up against 2 of the biggest teams in Europe in the semi and the final, Emery tactically outwitted his opponents, and his team showed nerves of steel to deliver Villarreal's first major piece of silverware. A historic achievement in his very first year. The next year, they were to go on and improve their performances even more from the previous season. Keep this in mind. Villarreal are a small club, with an average attendance of 15,000 in their stadium, and this season, for example, they've spent just 6.5 million euros on new signings and have made 20.6 million off sales. Last year, they had a net expenditure of just 44 million euros. Compare this to the hundreds of millions spent by the biggest clubs in the world. Emery was working with pocket change. Despite all this, he was still able to compete against the biggest clubs in the world. The year following their Europa League win, Emery led the Yellow Submarine on a historic run in the Champions League, coming out of the group stages behind Manchester United, before they beat Juventus in the round of 16 with a convincing 4-1 scoreline, including a 3-0 hammering of Juventus in Turin. After beating Juventus, there was still doubt around Emery's chances, since next up, Villarreal was set to face Bayern Munich in the quarters. Just 1 year after Bayern had dominated all of Europe, with Lewandowski and Hansi Flick's historic seasons. To everyone's surprise, Villarreal beat Bayern 2-1 on aggregate, with 2 of the most dogged defensive performances you'll ever see. With Unai at the helm, Villarreal could dare to dream, and after getting the scalps of two of Europe's biggest clubs in history, they set their sights on Liverpool in the semi-final. But their dream run would end in the semis, with Liverpool ultimately proving to be too much. But keep in mind how Emery took such a small club to the biggest stages in the Champions League. He was just one significant win away from the elusive final. Unai Emery's performances as Villarreal manager should give hope to Aston Villa fans. This is a manager who is tactically very astute, has Premier League experience, has the ability to compete against clubs far bigger in size and wealth through his mind alone. His introduction into the league seriously improves the levels of football we can expect to see in the Premier League. He is by far one of the best managers in world football right now. Not necessarily among the elite just yet, but he could certainly get there with this Aston Villa side if he's given time to implement his ideas. As Premier League fans, we now get to witness the best managers in the game compete on a weekly basis, and you can only expect the quality to improve very quickly. The league has legendary managers like Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp and Antonio Conte. Up-and-coming managers who are consistently proving themselves like Graham Potter at Chelsea, Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, Erik ten Hag at United, Eddie Howe at Newcastle. Then there's also Thomas Frank at Brentford, who has been absolutely exceptional. Patrick Vieira has gotten some memorable wins with Crystal Palace. Jesse March at Leeds, whose Leeds side has shown that even if they're not winning, they're certainly competing with the very best teams in England. Brendan Rodgers is having a horrible season so far, but he's also a very impressive manager, and Leicester's abysmal form this year doesn't take away from that. And let us not forget David Moyes, and a rejuvenated West Ham squad that's also improving with each game. Throw a certain Unai Emery into the mix, and the league's quality goes up even more. We could be in for one hell of a season very, very soon.